Three Hells Angels bikers hung from a splintered beam inside a frozen shed, bodies bruised, wrists bound, breath thinning beneath a screaming winter storm. No one knew they were there. No one expected them to survive. The mountains had already decided their fate, but the snow didn't erase everything. A battle-scarred German shepherd caught the faint metallic trace of blood hidden in the wind and froze mid-step. His handler knew that posture, knew that silence. Moments later, the dog was charging into the whiteout, and the man following him was a retired Navy SEAL who had once sworn he was done saving anyone. Before we begin, let us know where you're watching from. And if this story stirs something in your heart, subscribe for more stories of courage, redemption, and bonds forged when the cold should have won. Your support truly means the world. Winter owned the Montana mountains that night, a living thing of teeth and breath, howling through the trees as snow erased roads, footprints, and mercy alike. The shed stood crooked at the forest's edge, an old logging structure abandoned long before the world learned new ways to be cruel. Its roof sagged under the weight of years and ice, boards split and blackened by rot. Inside, the cold was different, sharper, deliberate, as if it had chosen this place. Three men hung from the central beam, their boots dangling inches above the frozen floor, bodies bound with industrial zip ties and coarse rope looped cruelly beneath their arms. Jake Knuckles Mercer was the first to open his eyes. 40 years old, built like a freight engine that had never learned to stop, he had a thick neck corded with muscle and forearms wrapped in faded tattoos. Skulls, angels, names scratched over by time and regret. His beard, once carefully trimmed, had grown uneven and stiff with frost. Blood had dried along his cheekbone, dark against weathered skin, browned by decades of sun and wind. Jake had always been the kind of man who filled space without asking permission, loud when he laughed, terrifying when he didn't. Yet now, suspended in the dead air, his chest rose in shallow, stubborn breaths. Pain throbbed behind his eyes, but worse than the pain was the familiar, unwelcome thought creeping in. This is how it ends. Not loud, not proud, just forgotten. Beside him hung Ryan Diesel Cole, 36, unconscious and dangerously still. Ryan was leaner than Jake, long-limbed and sinewy, with a mechanic's hands, scarred knuckles, grease permanently etched into the lines of his skin. His dark hair clung wetly to his forehead, where blood had seeped from a gash near the temple, drying into rusty streaks. One shoulder sagged at a wrong angle, the joint likely torn from its socket. Ryan had always been the quiet one, the man who spoke with actions instead of words. He'd learned early that silence kept you alive, first in a violent home, later on the road. If he dreamed now, they were likely not kind ones. The third man trembled uncontrollably. Tyler Buzz Nolan was only 29, his youth betrayed by the softness still clinging to his face. He was tall but narrow, all angles and nerves, with pale skin that had turned a frightening shade of blue around his lips. His hair, once a bright, defiant blonde, was darkened by sweat and melting snow. His eyes fluttered half open, glassy with fear, pupils too wide as his body fought the cold and lost. Tyler had joined the club looking for family, for something solid to lean against after a childhood spent bouncing between foster homes. He had found brotherhood, yes, but also violence he hadn't been ready to carry. Now, hanging from a beam like a butchered animal, he silently begged a God he wasn't sure he believed in. The ropes bit deeper every time the wind forced its way through the broken window, sending needles of snow spinning across the floor. Somewhere outside, timber cracked under the weight of ice. The storm did not care who these men were, what they'd done, or what they still might have become. The storm only knew how to finish things. Jake coughed, a harsh, tearing sound that echoed too loudly in the small space. Each breath burned. He tried to shift his weight, to ease the pressure on his ribs, but the zip ties only cut tighter. His jaw clenched. Pain, he could handle. Pain had been a language he spoke fluently since his teens, ever since one bad night in a Nevada bar had taught him that mercy was optional and weakness expensive. What clawed at him now was something else, an unexpected, traitorous fear that no one was coming. Ryan stirred faintly, a low groan slipping from his throat before his head lolled again. Jake turned his eyes toward him, anger flaring hot and useless. Not like this, he thought. You don't get to go out like this. He wanted to shout, to curse whoever had left them here, but his throat was raw, and sound felt like a waste. Tyler's breath hitched into a sob he couldn't fully release. He squeezed his eyes shut, lashes clotted with frost. Images crashed through his mind. Open highways under summer sun, the roar of engines, the false invincibility of speed. He had always believed consequences belonged to other people. Hanging here, he understood how wrong he'd been. Outside, the wind surged again, rattling the shed's warped walls. Snow piled higher against the door, sealing them in. Whoever had done this hadn't needed locks. Winter was lock enough. And yet, beneath the screaming storm, something else moved through the darkness. A scent carried on the wind, metallic, faint, alive. Blood did not vanish easily, not even in snow. It lingered, whispered, waited to be found. Jake felt a strange tightening in his chest, not pain this time, but instinct. The same instinct that once told him when to duck, when to swing, when to run. He didn't know why, but the certainty settled heavy and quiet inside him. The night wasn't finished. The storm howled on, trying to erase 3 lives from the mountainside. But somewhere beyond the trees, unseen and unheard, fate shifted its weight and began to walk toward the shed. Snow sifted sideways through the pines as Ethan Hale moved uphill, boots finding purchase where others would have slipped, breath steady despite the cold gnawing at his lungs. At 39, Ethan carried himself with the controlled economy of a man shaped by war, broad shoulders held square, spine straight without stiffness, movements deliberate rather than rushed. His face was hard in the way mountains were hard, angular jaw, cheekbones sharp beneath wind-burned skin, a short beard dark with frost framing a mouth that rarely wasted words. His eyes, a muted steel gray, missed very little. They had seen too much once, overseas, and now preferred silence. Shadow trotted several yards ahead, a 3-year-old German shepherd with a thick black and tan coat built for winter. He was large for his breed, chest deep, legs powerful, tail low and expressive. His amber eyes held an intelligence sharpened by training and dulled only slightly by past abandonment. Shadow had come from Valor, Haven Working Dog Rescue, discarded after an injury ended his service career. The limp had healed. The loyalty had never broken. Tonight, his ears snapped forward so suddenly that Ethan stopped mid-step. "Easy," Ethan murmured, more habit than command. Shadow ignored him. The dog's body stiffened, nose lifting as he tasted the wind. This was not the alert of a drill. This was instinct, raw and urgent. A low sound rolled from Shadow's chest. Not a growl, not a whine, but something between warning and plea. Then he turned sharply east and bolted down slope. "Shadow!" Ethan broke into a run, pack thudding against his back, heart slamming faster, not from exertion, but recognition. Shadow never broke formation, not once since the day Ethan had brought him home. Snow lashed Ethan's face as he followed, lungs burning, muscles responding on memory. 15 years ago, in another frozen place, running like this had meant survival. Tonight, it felt like debt coming due. The scent hit him before the structure appeared. Blood, old enough to be faint, fresh enough to matter, metallic, ugly, undeniable. Ethan slowed as a crooked shape emerged through the whiteout, the abandoned logging shed. He had passed it dozens of times over the years, a rotting relic swallowed by forest and neglect. Now it felt wrong, like a bruise on the landscape. Shadow skidded to a halt at the door, hackles rising, teeth bared. Snow had drifted halfway up the warped planks. Ethan approached carefully, gloved hand resting briefly on the dog's shoulder. Shadow's muscles trembled beneath the thick fur, not with fear, but with readiness. "Stay," Ethan said quietly. Shadow obeyed, planting himself beside the doorway like a sentry carved from bone and instinct. Ethan pushed the door open. It groaned, the sound swallowed instantly by the storm. His flashlight cut through the darkness in a slow arc and found the bodies. For a fraction of a second, the world narrowed to breath and light. 3 men hung from the central beam, boots barely above the floor, ropes biting into flesh. Ethan did not swear. He did not shout. His silence was absolute, the kind forged in places where emotion got men killed. Fury came later. First came work. He moved fast. The nearest man, Jake Mercer, though Ethan did not yet know his name, was conscious, eyes snapping open in startled disbelief. Ethan caught his weight, one arm braced around the man's torso, the other slicing through zip ties with a practiced flick of his knife. Jake gasped as his boots hit the ground, knees buckling. "Easy," Ethan said, voice low, controlled. "You're alive. Stay that way." Jake tried to speak. Only a rasp came out. The second man, Ryan Cole, was heavier, limp, his shoulder clearly dislocated. Ethan swore once then, under his breath, not from anger, but assessment. He lowered Ryan carefully, checking airway, pulse, weak, but there. Hypothermia edging close. The third, Tyler Nolan, was shaking. Violently, eyes wide with terror that had nowhere to go. Shadow whined softly, breaking his post to press his warm body against Tyler's side. The trembling slowed, just slightly. "Good," Ethan said to the dog. "Stay." Ethan worked with ruthless efficiency, cutting restraints, lowering bodies, wrapping what fabric he could spare around blue-tinged skin. His mind slipped into an old, familiar place. Triage and timing, heat and blood flow. Yet beneath it all, something stirred he hadn't felt in years. Not adrenaline, purpose. Jake dragged in a breath, pain sharpening his features. "Why?" he croaked. "Why you?" Ethan met his gaze. There was no judgment there, no curiosity, just fact. "Because he smelled you," Ethan said, nodding toward Shadow, "and because the cold doesn't get to decide." The storm battered the shed as if arguing otherwise. Ethan scanned the interior quickly. Boot prints, drag marks, tire tracks leading away, barely visible through the snow. Outside. Whoever had done this had planned it, had counted on winter to erase the rest. Ethan straightened slowly. 15 years ago, a stranger had pulled him from a frozen river and vanished without a name. He had carried that weight ever since, a promise with nowhere to land. Tonight, standing over 3 broken men and a dog who refused to look away, Ethan felt something settle into place. "Can you move?" he asked. Jake nodded faintly. Tyler swallowed and nodded harder than he felt. Ryan groaned, stirring. "Good," Ethan said. "Then we're leaving. Now." Outside, the wind screamed in protest. Shadow moved first, leading the way as if the forest itself had given him a path. Ethan followed, shoulders squared, dragging a battered timber sled toward the shed. The night had tried to finish 3 lives. It had failed. The sled creaked as Ethan leaned his weight into the rope, boots biting into snow that squealed under pressure. The forest closed around them like a cathedral of ice. Branches bowed, moonlight fractured into pale shards. Ryan lay strapped to the sled, breath shallow but steady. Shadow pressed along his flank, the dog's dense coat radiating heat in stubborn defiance of the cold. Jake stumbled beside Ethan, massive shoulders hunched, every step measured to keep from collapsing. Tyler followed close, arms wrapped around himself, teeth chattering hard enough to hurt. No one spoke for a long stretch. Words froze faster than sweat out here. When the cabin finally emerged, a low, dark shape crouched against the wind. Ethan felt the smallest easing in his chest. Shelter mattered. Heat mattered. Tonight, time mattered most. Inside, the fire took quickly, logs sapping as flame caught. Ethan worked without ceremony. He cut away soaked layers, replaced them with dry wool, checked pulses, lifted chins, counted breaths. He moved like a man solving a problem he had solved before, somewhere loud and far away, where mistakes wrote names on stone. Jake watched him through half-lidded eyes, a humorless curl tugging at his mouth. Up close, the biker's face showed the map of a hard life. Broken nose set slightly off-center, crow's feet earned under sun and squint, scars that weren't accidents. He'd once been a dock worker, a job that taught him how to lift weight and carry silence. The night a knife found him in a bar fight, this had taught him something else. Trust was expensive. "You should have left us," Jake rasped finally. "World's cleaner that way." Ethan didn't look up. He tightened a bandage, precise. "Clean is a lie," he said. "Cold is honest." Tyler hovered near the fire, palms out, the flames painting his thin face orange. The fear hadn't left him. It had settled, heavy and buzzing. He'd grown up learning to read rooms, to tell when a voice was about to break or a fist about to swing. That habit kept him alive, but it also kept him small. "We're not good men," Tyler said, voice cracking. "You saved the wrong people." Ethan glanced at him then, a quick assessment that felt like being measured for armor. "Snow doesn't ask who deserves it," he said. "It just kills." "I don't." Shadow shifted, nose lifting, as Ethan moved past Ryan's shoulder. The dog's amber eyes tracked the room, calm but alert. 3 years old, injured once, and discarded, Shadow had learned what it meant to be useful without being owned. His tail thumped once when Ethan knelt beside Ryan, who groaned as heat began to wake the pain. Ethan eased the dislocated shoulder back into place with a firm, practiced motion. Ryan cried out, then sagged, sweat beading at his hairline. "Easy," Ethan murmured, a gentleness surprising even him. As Ryan's breathing steadied, Ethan's gaze snagged on something half hidden in the discarded pile, a syringe cap, clear plastic, snapped clean. He turned it in the light, frown deepening. Nearby, the zip ties, industrial grade, bore stamped lot codes. He crouched, studied the floor. Boot prints, crisp edges, deep tread. Tactical, not drunk vengeance, not club business. "Talk," Ethan said, not unkindly, but firm. Jake swallowed, jaw working. The bravado drained like color from frostbitten skin. "We were riding a logging spur," he said. "Cut through to save time. Saw trucks where trucks don't go. Men moving fast, quiet. Kids in the back." The word landed hard. Tyler's hands shook worse. "They saw us see them," he added. "Didn't argue, just moved." Ryan, eyes open now, voice hoarse, finished the thought. "Anesthetic, lights out. Woke up hanging." Ethan's jaw set. He cataloged the details. The drug delivery, the gear, the choice of place. Organized, funded, confident Winter would finish the job. He stood, went to the shelf by the window, pulled down a small metal tin. Inside, matches, a compass, a folded photo. He shut it again without looking. "Who?" he asked. Jake shook his head. Faces covered, voices trained. Not locals. Silence thickened, broken only by the fire. Outside, the wind tried the cabin walls, testing. Ethan dragged the old timber sled inside to dry, then stepped back, considering. 15 years ago, a stranger had hauled him from a frozen river and disappeared. No name, no thanks, just heat where there had been none. Ethan had carried that debt like a stone. Now, 3 men sat warming by his fire, guilt steaming off them as surely as their boots. Guilt, he knew, had a temperature. Too cold, and it numbed you. Too hot, and it burned everything you touched. "You're staying," Ethan said. "Until you can move." Jake barked a short laugh that turned into a cough. "You planning to play hero?" Ethan met his eyes. "I'm planning to keep you alive," shadow settled between. Ryan and Tyler, broad back a living barrier against the night. Tyler reached out without thinking, fingers brushing the dog's fur, and felt his breathing slow. The fire popped, a spark leaping. Ethan crouched again, collecting the syringe cap, the ties, scraping a boot print into a tray. Evidence. The storm hadn't erased everything, and neither would he. The night had chosen its shape. Ethan would choose his. Ethan stepped outside the cabin long enough for the cold to remind him why hesitation was a luxury. Snow had eased into a brittle drift, the wind calmer but sharper, as if the mountains were listening now instead of shouting. He pulled the satellite phone from his pack, a compact black device scarred with old use, and turned away from the door so the others wouldn't hear the tone of what was coming. Shadow followed anyway, padding silently to his side, breath steaming, ears angled forward. The call connected on the third pulse. Marcus Mark Teller's voice came through, clipped and distorted, steel wrapped in static. Mark was in his late 40s, tall and broad even by SEAL standards, with a square face framed by close-cropped silver hair, and a habit of speaking only what mattered. Years ago, he had been Ethan's commanding officer, the kind of leader who never raised his voice because he never had to. War had left him with a permanent crease between his brows, a line carved by responsibility rather than age. "You're compromised," Mark said without greeting. "Satellite sweep shows movement south of your ridge, multiple vehicles. Reinforcements are coming, but not fast. Hours, Ethan, minimum." Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Hours meant footprints filling with snow. Hours meant mistakes turning permanent. "Copy," he replied. "I'm moving." A pause. Then Mark again, quieter. "You sure?" Ethan looked back through the Piaz cabin window. Jake sat upright now, jaw clenched, pain riding him hard but contained. Ryan leaned against the wall, color slowly returning to his face, eyes sharp despite the injury. Tyler stood near the fire, hands steady for the first time, fingers resting on Shadow's back like an anchor. "Yeah," Ethan said. "I'm sure." Inside, the decision landed heavy but clean. Waiting meant being found. Moving meant risk, but risk could be managed. Ethan laid out gear on the table, rope, headlamps, spare batteries, flares. He spoke plainly, no speeches. "We follow their exit," he said. Tire tracks. They'll lead us somewhere they think it is safe. Jake was the first to nod. Pain had stripped the sarcasm from him, leaving something harder beneath. Hell's Angels ain't saints, he said. But I won't die hanging, and I won't leave kids in a cage. His voice didn't shake. It surprised him. They moved before dawn, the world blue and brittle. Shadow took point, nose low, tail steady, a black and tan line cutting across white. The tire tracks were faint but disciplined, deep ruts from heavy vehicles, spaced evenly, no panic in their turn angles. Ryan knelt once to study them, fingers brushing the compressed snow. Convoy, he said. Not joyriders. His mechanic's eye noticed what others missed. The trail bent north toward Cold Canyon, where the land fell away into a scar of old industry. The mica mine emerged from the fog like a ribcage picked clean, rusted towers, shattered conveyors, concrete dusted with mica that glittered faintly in the low light. Tyler stopped short, breath catching. He had worked maintenance years ago before the road swallowed him. They replaced the conveyor chains, he said softly. New steel, recently. Someone's paying to keep this place alive. They circled wide. Ryan pointed out a secondary access, an old ventilation spur masked by fallen timber. Street crews don't plan like this, he muttered. These guys do. Inside, the mine smelled of cold metal and old oil. Voices echoed ahead. 2 guards, bored, careless. Ethan signaled. Shadow flowed forward, silent as smoke. The first man dropped without a sound. The second reached for a radio and never finished the thought. Zip ties clicked. Breath slowed. They found the children in a storage bay, huddled behind chain link, faces gray with fear and dust. Small hands reached through the wire. One boy whispered, "Are you real?" Jake knelt despite the pain, his massive frame folding gently. "Yeah," he said, voice rough. "We're real." Extraction was fast and ugly. An alarm screamed somewhere deeper in the mine, metal on metal. They moved. Snow swallowed sound as they broke into the open, sleds groaning under new weight. The return to the cabin felt longer than the approach, every shadow a threat. Night fell hard. Shadow stiffened first. Bells Ethan had strung earlier whispered, then rang. Headlights cut through trees. Engines. "They found us," Tyler said, calm now, oddly. Ethan didn't hesitate. He directed them like a team, not heroes. Jake braced a door. Ryan covered angles. Tyler moved the children to the crawl space Ethan had prepped. Shadow planted himself between danger and breath. Gunfire tore the dark. Wood splintered, then light, blinding white, and voices like iron. Federal commands. Mark's silhouette at the edge of the clearing, broad shoulders squared against the storm. When it ended, the quiet felt unreal. Ethan leaned against the cabin wall, blood warm on his sleeve, breath steady. The children slept. Jake sat on the floor, back to the hearth, eyes wet and unashamed. Ryan exhaled like he'd been holding air for years. Tyler laughed once, soft and disbelieving. Shadow returned to Ethan's side. The road had chosen blood. They had chosen otherwise. Dawn had not yet earned the right to arrive when the mine finally went quiet. The echoes of gunfire faded into the cold corridors, leaving behind the shallow breaths of frightened children and the hum of adrenaline refusing to settle. Ethan stood still for a heartbeat, listening, not to sound, but to absence. Shadow remained pressed to his leg, muscles tight, ears tracking the dark like a living compass. The children huddled close, eyes wide, wrapped in coats far too large for their small frames. Their fear had a weight to it, heavy and clinging, but it was no longer alone. They moved fast, because hesitation had a habit of finding you when you thought the danger was over. The sleds groaned under new weight as they crossed back into the forest, the moon slipping behind clouds like it didn't want to watch anymore. Jake took point at the door of the cabin when they returned, his shoulders screaming in protest as he braced the warped frame. He was massive, even bent and bleeding, his tattoos dark against pale skin, beard crusted with ice. Something had shifted in him during the runback, an old instinct repurposed. For the first time in his life, he used his size to shield instead of intimidate. Inside, Ethan moved with quiet authority. He placed the children in the crawl space he'd reinforced earlier, laying blankets with care that bordered on reverence. Tyler helped despite the tremor in his hands, his long, thin fingers fumbling but persistent. He murmured soft reassurances, words he'd once needed himself and never received. Ryan, jaw tight, took position at the back entrance, his lean frame steady against the wall, eyes calculating angles. He had always been the watcher. Tonight, watching meant guarding breath. The first bell chimed, a faint, almost polite sound in the wind. Then another. Headlights cut through the trees, harsh and white, bouncing off snow like thrown knives. Engines idled, voices carried, disciplined and close. Ethan triggered the light. Traps, flares erupting into blinding glare that shattered night into chaos. Shadow launched at the back door as it splintered, a black and tan force that knocked a man sideways before he could step through. The dog's age showed in his movements. 3 years old, strong and fast, but his restraint showed more. He held without tearing, pinned without killing. Gunfire cracked, wood screamed. Jake took a hit that spun him down to one knee. Breath punched from his chest. He laughed once, sharp and wild, then gritted his teeth and stayed upright. "Not tonight," he growled, more to himself than anyone else. Ryan dragged him back behind cover with a grunt, blood darkening the sleeve of his jacket. Then the night broke open. Floodlights surged from the tree line, steady and overwhelming. Voices boomed with authority that didn't ask permission. "Federal agents, drop your weapons!" Boots thundered. The storm seemed to recoil, snow falling softer, quieter, as if even the mountains recognized command. The attackers complied quickly, or were made to. Handcuffs clicked, radios chirped, the chaos folded into order. Commander Marcus Mark Teller stepped into the clearing, tall and broad-shouldered, silver hair damp with snow, face carved into lines that spoke of too many nights like this. His eyes found Ethan immediately. He took in the blood on Ethan's sleeve, the dog at his side, the men behind him. Mark nodded once. Approval without ceremony, relief without softness. Medical teams moved in. The children were carried out first, wrapped in thermal blankets, clinging to hands offered without condition. Jake sat slumped against the cabin wall as a medic worked on his shoulder. Up close, exhaustion stripped him bare, leaving a man who looked older than 40 and younger than his regrets. "Guess I didn't die like an animal after all," he muttered. The medic smiled faintly and kept working. Ryan sat quietly, letting a splint be fitted, eyes tracking the scene with something like disbelief. "Did we do this?" he asked no one. Tyler, kneeling beside him, answered softly, "We didn't run." That seemed to satisfy him. Ethan leaned against the doorframe, the weight finally catching up. Shadow returned to his side, pressing close, head heavy against Ethan's thigh. Ethan rested a hand on the dog's neck, feeling the steady pulse beneath the fur. For years, he had believed peace was a place you reached when the fighting stopped. Tonight, he understood it differently. Peace was something you built, piece by piece, with choices made under pressure. As dawn crept in, pale and tentative, the forest looked almost gentle again. Snow clung to branches like offerings. The cabin stood scarred but standing. Jake watched the sky change color, eyes wet without apology. Ryan closed his eyes, breathing deeper than he had in years. Tyler let himself smile, small and real. They were not redeemed saints. No one pretended they were, but redemption, Ethan knew, was rarely a transformation. More often, it was a direction, one step taken when it mattered most. Winter had tried to claim them all. It had failed. Not because Winter was weak, but because this time, men chose differently. Shadow lifted his head and barked once, sharp and clear, as if sealing the night's verdict. The storm was over, not because the cold had gone, but because it had been answered. Sometimes, miracles do not arrive with thunder or fire. Sometimes they come wrapped in snow, carried on tired legs, guided by a loyal dog and a human heart that refuses to look away. In this story, no one was perfect, not the men who were saved, not the man who saved them. Yet grace found them anyway, because God does not wait for us to be clean before He reaches out. He meets us exactly where the cold is deepest. He sends help through unexpected hands. He turns strangers into shelter. He turns one small choice into a lifeline. And maybe that is the miracle meant for us to notice. In everyday life, we may never face a blizzard or a gunshot, but we all stand at crossroads where kindness costs something, where silence is easier than action, where walking away feels safer than stepping in. Faith is not proven in grand moments. It is proven in those quiet seconds when we choose compassion over fear, courage over comfort, love over judgment. If this story touched your heart, maybe it is, because God is whispering to you too. Maybe He is reminding you that you can be someone's rescue, someone's warmth, someone's sign that hope is not vanished. So, if this message gave you even a small sense of light, please share it with someone who might be walking through their own winter. Leave a comment. Your words may reach a heart you will never meet. And subscribe to this channel so we can continue sharing stories of faith, courage, and quiet miracles together. May God bless you and your home. May He protect your loved ones, steady your heart in difficult seasons, and guide your steps when the path is unclear. And may you always remember, no night is so cold that His grace cannot find you. Amen.